Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope you had a great weekend. I had a rather active one. Most enjoyable as well, actually. I still can't get over that sentence that the President used, we don't fear the future, we shape it. He's very empowering, isn't he? Got to give him credit for that. Hillary Clinton, we heard the man from hope, Bill Clinton, and the man of hope, Barack Obama. And I think, that tweet, which was a lovely photograph, really positions Hillary as looking up in the tradition of Obama, Bill Clinton as well. Of course, that's in comparison to a very dystopian picture of the world. It was indeed a pleasure meeting the Foreign Minister for France this morning over breakfast at the Fairmont, Jean-Marc Ayrault. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'll put up a photograph of the breakfast table as it was laid out this morning before anyone got there. Jean-Marc Ayrault met with Boris Johnson on the 28th of July, tweeted this photograph, let me put that one up. He said many things, and he said it's time for Europe to do more with Africa post-Brexit. And I thought that was an interesting comment. Look at the most active futures worldwide. This was on Friday. Everything is awesome except the VIX and the dollar and feeder cattle. This was the GDP number print, which came out much softer than the market expected. I'll get to that momentarily. I'm reading Paul Theroux's book, which is about V.S. Naipaul, called In Video's Shadow, I think it is called. I just started it and read it many years ago. It's brilliant. And thoroughly enjoying it at the moment. They've met, they're in Makerere University in Uganda. Paul had a mistress, a Nigerian lady, whom he'd been with for 3 months, and she kept telling him, give me a baby, and then just finds out she's pregnant, turns out 4 months old. So pretty interesting and a very good book, actually. One day I wish to be as happy as Bill Clinton playing with a balloon. It's just extraordinary, isn't it? The joy on his face with those balloons. I just felt like a little boy, sort of dived into his skin and wanted to be there playing with those balloons. To someday find someone who looks at me the way Bill Clinton looks at this balloon. Usain Bolt's last Olympic run will be in Rio. I like this photograph from Rolling Stone of him. Obviously, that's the preeminent race, isn't it? Run faster than any person in the world. So exciting. The Rio 2016 Olympics. Look at this photograph again from Rolling Stone. It's exciting. Looking forward to that, notwithstanding all the noise that we've heard. Ambassador Rice's China visit highlights cooperation and sends a positive sign, said XH Xinhua News. And this is all about the South China Sea. The strategic geopolitical centrality of the South China Sea is well known. A naval crossroads of roughly $5 trillion in annual trade, transit sea lanes to roughly half of the global daily merchant shipping, a third of global oil trade, and 2/3 of all liquid natural gas trade. It's also the key hub of China's global supply chain. The South China Sea protects China's access to the Indian Ocean, which happens to be Beijing's crucial energy lifeline. And this is the point I was making in 2013 when I said I have no doubt that the Indian Ocean is set to regain its glory days. China and India's dependence on imported crude oil is increasing, and the US, interestingly, is decreasing. I'm also certain the eastern seaboard of Africa, from Mozambique through Somalia, is the last great energy prize in the 21st century. Therefore, the control of the Indian Ocean becomes kind of decisive, and with control, China can be shut down quite quickly. A sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean, and that ties in with the previous article. Make no mistake, at some time in the future there will be a serious confrontation between the US and China over access to the South China Sea. And I tend to agree with that. I think it's going to be sooner rather than later, purely because the US has a decisive military advantage at this point, which is going to be eroded over time. Clinton is inspiring, yes, but she doesn't tap into the psyche of the disillusioned and dispossessed like Trump does. And I was touching on this in June when I said what is resonating, and I was talking about Brexit, but I think Trump is also Brexit related. And I said what is resonating more is an apocalyptic view of a dystopian future where little England, I was talking about England, but I think you can say little America for those folks, is simply overrun by immigrants from all over the world. And on that point of the apocalypse or dystopia, I went back to Adam Curtis's The Power of Nightmares. If you've never seen it, it's a documentary on the BBC. It's probably the most remarkable bit of documentary filmmaking I've seen. In it, he says, in the past, our politicians offered us dreams of a better world. Now they promise to protect us from nightmares. The most frightening of these is the threat of an international terror attack. But just as the dreams were not true, neither are those nightmares. John Allen, a retired four-star Marine general, thundered into an arena dotted with American flags that voters faced a choice between Mrs. Clinton and a dark place of discord and fear. From there I jumped to City of Panic by Paul Virilio, translated by Julie Rose, and an article in The Guardian. It's a fantastic book. Virilio is an extraordinary thinker. He talks in this book, which is called City of Panic. He starts off with Paris, the city of his birth, but by the end of the book, all cities have become concentration camps. One thinks of London when he talks of a few atrophied cities that pride themselves on being the epicenter of the world when they are merely lost citadels. In other words, targets for firestorms. And the recent bombings give Virilio's musings on hyper-terrorism added resonance. In an era of globalization, he argues, a nation's borders are no longer external but run through its cities. Nations will have to defend themselves not abroad but within their own dense metropolises. The metropolitics of globalization will take over the geopolitics of nations. Modern warfare is a war on civilians, which, aided by instantaneous telecommunications, will result in a world civil war, the global equivalent of the riots in Los Angeles after the footage of police officers beating Rodney King was broadcast. Virilio is an impressive commentator on the conditioning power of the mass media and the way in which every shattering event, from natural catastrophes to the Columbia shuttle disaster and the attack on the Twin Towers, gets world coverage and is put on a loop. Our minds are literally besieged by these weapons of mass communication, as he calls them, creating a panic-driven tele-reality and resulting in an odd kind of emotional synchronization in which terror must be instantaneously felt by all. On the scale of global terrorism, Virilio maintains that the global village has created hyper-terrorism as its integral accident. Excuse me, just as derailment is the integral accident of a train. The Pentagon is eager to exploit the audio-visual impact of real-time mass communication. Remember Saddam's statue being toppled. But unfortunately, so are the terrorists. The same impulse drives contemporary art, says Virilio, and he often returns to Stockhausen's incendiary remark that 9/11 was the greatest work of art ever. Interesting piece I came across about Russia's rise to cyber war superpower. The Russians are top-notch, says Chris Feenan, an ex-director at DARPA for cyber war research, now a CEO at security firm Manifold Technology and a former director of cybersecurity legislation in the Obama administration. They're some of the best in the world. saying that the DNC hack may simply be the icing on the cyber war cake. In a flurry of action over the last decade, Russia has established itself as one of the world's great and most active cyber powers. The focus this week is on the leak of nearly 20,000 emails from the Democratic National Committee. The evidence, plainly not definitive, but clearly substantial, has found support among a wide range of security professionals. The Russian link is further supported by US intelligence officials, who reportedly have high confidence that Russia is behind the attack. It really is an extraordinary military, cyber, whatever you want to call it, advance that Russia has achieved under Putin. And I think it would be simply churlish not to recognize that fact. International markets, look at the US 2-year note yield. It's still priced for a rate hike or even two. But it gives you a flavor of how the markets have been thinking about interest rate increases. The higher the yield, the more likely they see it. The lower the yield, the less likely they see it. Developed market currencies versus the dollar over the last 3 months, it's all about the yen. Currency markets, let's go there. Euro dollar 111.70, dollar index 95.67, Japanese yen 102.40. Swissy 0.9703, the pound is at 132.32, Aussie 0.7594, India rupee 66.715, South Korean 111.0758, Rial 324.89, Egyptian pound 8.8799, and the rand had a big day on Friday, broke through resistance at 14.1014. And now at 13.8866. The key question is, will it hold? If it does, we're going to strengthen some more. We've got the local elections coming up, so let's see how that plays out. But I, for one, would prefer to sell the rand right now than buy it. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. We've slipped back a bit after that poor GDP print on Friday. 93's key support some ways away. I don't think this correction is going to be that deep. Unlike Morgan Stanley, you're expecting the dollar to sell off by about 5%. Euro versus the dollar, 111.71 last. Let's see how far this bounce goes. I think it's more a story of people getting out of the dollar than getting into the euro, as it were. This was again from Friday morning, crazy 1,000 point price swings in Nikkei futures last night. That was Thursday night. Across all exchanges. This was, of course, because of the expectations around Crude. Gold is regaining its sheen. Have a look at this from Bloomberg Markets. Gives you an idea of returns of gold shares, which have really outperformed. 6-month gold, 1347.15. 1348.73. It doesn't feel as bullish as it felt when it went up there last time, but let's keep an eye on it. I think crude oil, this is having a difficult time. Crude oil is about $41.68 in WTI. I'm expecting fresh 2016 lows, I'm afraid. US crude oil exports surged in May to an all-time high of 662,000 barrels per day. My piece over the weekend was emerging markets make a comeback. Emerging and frontier markets, for the most part, had a very difficult time in 2015 and at the start of 2016. However, we have seen a strong rebound as investors began to scan the markets for yield. According to a report from Canadian brokerage Pavilion Global Markets quoted in Barron's, the global search for yield means we expect frontier market bonds and equities to do well in the next few months, and conditions are increasingly supportive for frontier debt and equity markets. You might ask what has happened. The catalyst for this rally and search for yield was in part in the Brexit vote. Markets quickly assumed that Brexit would force the Bank of England's hand and incline them towards further easing. Interest rates are at a record low of 0.5% and expected to be cut further, and another dosage of quantitative easing. Europe continues to face challenges, and a number of folks reckon Brexit makes Frexit, Nexit, and even an Italexit more likely, post-Brexit, than less likely. Hopes of a substantial recovery in the US were dashed after Friday's GDP print, which showed a 1.2% annualized increase in the April to June period, less than the 2.5% median forecast. Japan disappointed markets last week, who were expecting its central bank governor, Kuroda, to pull out the bazooka and even launch helicopter money. But he chose to keep most of his powder dry. This very lackluster international backdrop, in the sense that there is very little pressure, if any, to tighten monetary conditions across the world, has encouraged international investors to put risk on in that eternal row-row battle. Row-row describes the process where investors move to riskier, potentially high-yielding investments, and then back again to supposedly lower-yielding investments, which are perceived to have lower risk. Once upon a time, risk-on used to float all boats, but this time around we're seeing a great deal of selection. Crude oil continues to tank, and therefore conditions for the oil producers, in my view, will remain challenging. However, this positive risk-on spillover can be seen, for example, in the Rand, which breached the 14 mark for the first time this year. The Rand gained more than 2% to 13.8325 against the dollar, reaching its strongest level since November 4. The Rand is the preeminent row-row proxy. This surge in the value is a loud and clear signal. Coming closer to home, we're presented with a dichotomy, or what I previously characterized as a bifurcation in the securities exchange. The Nairobi All Shares down just 2.27% this year when compared to the NSE 20, which is down 13.66% this year, which is more than 1,000 basis point underperformance in the NSE 20 index. Safaricom closed at a record every day last week except on Monday, has been an outlier, with CEO Bob Collymore presiding over an extraordinary golden age for shareholder value creation during his tenure. Safaricom ranks in the top percentile of value creation for shareholders anywhere in the world. Guerrilla-style attempts to wrestle the price low in Safaricom and the governments of Kenya Eurobond have failed miserably. Furthermore, these attempts have diminished their biggest proponents to the point of zero credibility. Government of Kenya Eurobonds, furthermore, these attempts have diminished their proponents. Standard Chartered has also had an exceptional year when compared to the rest of the banking sector, which has been soft, and if interest rate caps are introduced, it's going to get even softer. We are no longer in an environment where risk-on floats all boats. Leaky boats are getting zero traction. The US grew at a seasonally and inflation-adjusted annual rate of 1.2%. Have a look at this from Wall Street Journal, and then have a look at the reaction of Japanese bond yields, who were quite disappointed with Kuroda. Finally, this is a view of the Sugarloaf Mountain in Botafogo from Corcovado Hill in Rio de Janeiro. This photograph is by AFP. Let's move on to Africa. Congo turns away plane carrying an opposition leader, Moise Katumbi. Refused to clear a plane carrying presidential hopeful Moise Katumbi to land in the Central African nation in campaigns for national elections. I wanted to return to my country and participate despite threats of arrest made against me by the Minister of Justice, he said in an email statement. They're not going to let him back. 6th of June, you will remember I said birthday boy Kabila, constitutionally barred from running for the third term. Katumbi has set out his stall now and is a formidable adversary. Numbers were building. This is June again, and Katumbi must have been thinking this might just turn into a tsunami. Again, going back to the 6th of June, I wrote, President Kabila, however, outwitted Katumbi by removing him from the street and the Congo entirely. And that might well prove a cleverly administered technical knockout. So when you've done that, you're not going to let him straight back in again. There were lots of political rallies. This is the return of the 82-year-old Tshisekedi. In the crowd, apparently, someone waved a white cross with the words, Adieu, Kabila, R.I.P. UN Security Council agrees to send police to Burundi. There are issues over the numbers. You cannot shoot a hashtag, this flag movement, an interesting point, an important one in the current environment that we're finding ourselves in. Local elections aren't usually make or break. In South Africa, these ones will be. the ANC is expected to lose big in the urban centres. South African all-share is up 4.15% this year. Dollar rand, as I said, bust through resistance at 14.10, and now we're trading below that. If we don't return above 14.10, we're going to see a further rally in the rand. Talking about a much lower current account deficit than last year, which is supporting the currency, and 2 months of trade surplus. A delegation from the IMF arrived in Egypt on Saturday, responding to a request for a multi-billion-dollar bailout for the country's flagging economy. That's why the stock market's been going up as well. Egyptian EGX 30, I think, is the best performing stock market in Africa, up 13.95%. Nigerian all-share index down 2.21% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index down 9.96% this year. At that breakfast that I attended, the central bank governor said to the foreign minister, "We are very confident we have it under control." He was referring to the banking sector. Kenya shilling 101.398, Nairobi all share down 2.27% this year. Remember that bifurcation I was talking about. Safaricom, just purely on price, up 16.87% this year, and at a record that's discounting 2 dividends, the full year dividend and the special dividend, which has to be added on. NSE 20, minus 13.66%. I took this photograph evening from Nairobi. I hope you like it. CIC Insurance reported first half earnings per share surged 75%. The share price has tumbled 29.83% this year. I haven't checked what it's doing this morning. It was really a story of claims incurred declining by 26% versus gross premium income declining 10%. They're talking, saying it's a big, they're pursuing quality, not quantity. And finally, as I said, a big drop in claims incurred juiced that first half earnings per share. Thanks for stopping by. I'm always grateful.